What is up, guys, and welcome to the special preview episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me my two great co-hosts, Fede Perez and Ralph Hannah. And guys, here we are. We're still in Copa America season. We are still here doing our preview episodes. This is the second one that we're doing of Guarani Vision for the group of Paraguay, featuring Colombia, Brazil, and Costa Rica. We already did one with Brazil, and today we are going to be talking about Colombia. And what better way than to talk about Colombia than with Simon Edwards, a Colombian football expert based there in Colombia. So Simon, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. And firstly, for those that maybe don't know you, don't follow you, don't know really your story, what is your connections to Colombian football, and I guess what made you fascinated about it? Because you're not technically Colombian by the accent we're about to hear, but
how did you guess? Yeah. No, so I've been living in Colombia for 15, 16 years now, a long time. Oh, it used to be cool to say I've been here for so long, but now I feel really old. But I'm originally from England, but I came here 15, 16 years ago, working as a journalist, working on the scouting side of things as well. So yeah, love Colombia, love Colombian football, and happy to say that it's become my job. So yeah, happy to share my experience.
Well, I think there's also this sort of happy vibe happening with Colombia at the moment. You know, obviously we're speaking at the time of recording 24 hours before the start of the Copa America here in the United States. And there have been a lot of Colombians that are really hopeful on this team because as we speak, they're on a 23-game unbeaten streak. It's the longest streak among all the South American teams and North American teams participating in this tournament. And there was a lot of hype given to Nestor Lorenzo's team to finally win another Copa America for the first time since 2001. They look like a team that could do it, but I guess my first question to you, Simon, is what is the expectations back home and even for you personally about this Colombia side heading into this Copa America?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of enthusiasm. Obviously, when you go eight games, consecutive wins, a long unbeaten streak. So there's a lot of enthusiasm. And I think there's a connection that's felt with this particular side. I'd say the style of play as well is very Colombian. It kind of has a feel of that going back to the 1994, the dynamism, the interchange of positions, the quite narrow setup. It's not a team built around the structure. It's a team built around players who can fulfill multiple roles and interchange. And that's all quite exciting. It feels very Colombian to have those short passes, that dynamism and that energy. So I think not only is the enthusiasm around the results, because you can play badly and get some good results. I think it's that the Colombia team is playing some exciting stuff. It feels a bit more 2014 than 2018. And of course, the results in 2018 were fine. We got to the World Cup, we did all right. But I think it feels like there's a lot of enthusiasm, excitement, and there's a good connection with some of the players as well, and some of the stories for the players in the side.
Yeah, you guys really look like you could do something very serious in this Copa America, and you're our first rival, Simon. So we obviously got to talk about some of the stars. I actually, one of my favorite players, obviously, in this team is James. We really suffered him last time around in Defensores del Chaco. We played Colombia last year, and this team managed the ball so well against us. We had difficulties in the midfield, and I'm thinking, is James happy finally with the football that he has around him, with the stars that they have around him, with the young players? Also, he finally looks like he's himself. He finally looks like he can build that legacy that he's been trying to build all this time with the national team. Or does he need a title for everyone to kind of respect him also back home?
Yeah, obviously the question is always going to be James Valderrama, who is the 10 for Colombia, and obviously winning a title would go a huge way to consolidating his position. James obviously is hugely admired for what he did with the national team. That's where he played his best football, and that's where he made his name. So I think it's great to see him in the center of a team, as I say, which functions not based upon positions or necessarily based upon individual stars. It's players who can fulfill multiple roles, and I think James likes that dynamism around him, because there's so many players who can break into the box. Sometimes Colombia will play with that focal point number 9, but it's not as though, there's other players who will get into the box. Munoz flying up from right back, Mojico on the left, Diaz, John Arias, I think is a very important player. And then obviously there's a lot of creative players coming off the bench like Carrascal and Quintero. So I think there's just a lot of players that James likes as well. And I think one of the important things for this Colombia side is, while again, the group isn't massively young, but there's been a lot of changes over the last few years. But some of the more experienced players have bought into that. The likes of Ospina, who's often on the bench now, but he's still very happy to be part of the team. James, obviously Cuadrado's gone out. I think there's been a smooth transition. Obviously, winning helps. If they've been losing, it might be more difficult. But I think everyone's kind of bought in, and it's great to see James as well marking the difference in games.
I think it's no surprise or no big news or anything new to anybody that's going to be listening to this podcast that we're not coming in well to the Copa America, Simon. So we're probably going to be a very defensive team against Colombia, and we're going to try to defend and try to keep that 0 on our score sheet as much as possible. So I'm thinking on the long game, who can save this team in case the game comes down to the last minutes? It's a tight match and Colombia can't break it away. How do you see Colombia trying to fix the match in that sense? Who could be the 12th man coming in from the bench? You mentioned Carrascal, you mentioned Quinteros, but does Colombia have really just one player that can come in and make the difference from the bench, or do they have just too much?
No, look, honestly, I think while Colombia don't have the big names in the top leagues in Europe, as they had in the past, I think there's only 10 players playing in Western Europe. A lot of players in Russia, there's a few players all over the place, Brazil and so forth. I think there is good depth. If you look at Colombia's best 11 and their second best 11, I think their second 11 would do quite well in this tournament. And I don't say that because of the superstars, but I think, for example, you take out Borre and you put in John Cordoba or John Duran. They're different players, but there's not a massive difference in quality. Whether you have Kevin Castaño or Matias Uribe, they're both very good players, So, again, I don't think there's many 10 out of 10 players in this Colombia side, but I think the whole squad, Richard Rios coming off the bench, Yasser Asprilla, Quintero with the set pieces, Sinisterra is a good player as well. So, again, I don't think there's anyone. You're not looking at the bench going, what can we do? There's probably 2 players from most positions. Even at centre back, there's 4, 7, 8 out of 10 centre backs there, which is okay. There's no world superstar, but there's some good options. And I think as well, Colombia, as I say, Borre offers you something very different to Duran. In terms of the intelligence, the movement, the pressing, the physicality. They're very different players, but they're both good players for this level, I'd say.
Hey, Simon. It's not looking good for Paraguay. The more we talk and move into this podcast, we just start looking at some of the strengths you're talking about with Colombia. I know you follow a lot of Colombian players in the US, so you're used to the fact that a lot play on synthetic pitches. Of course, the Energy Stadium in Houston is going to be a artificial pitch, which is usually said to favor teams that are faster. So are Colombia also looking at that and thinking we have an advantage over a Paraguay team that particularly struggles at fullback and has a relatively slow defense when you're looking at people like Lucho Diaz going up against them?
Yeah, I think that with a synthetic pitch, and obviously every synthetic pitch is a little bit different. There's the pure plastic pitch, and there's obviously the pitches that have a mix of grass and synthetic. So there's a difference. I think it does produce fast football. It can, the ball can bobble a little bit unpredictably. It's a different kind of challenge in terms of controlling the ball and playing at fast pace. I think in general it will benefit Colombia, but also a very fast game can be difficult to control, particularly if what Paraguay may look to do is stay compact and be disruptive. If it's a very fast passing game, if Colombia click, then it's hard to defend against. But if it's a very tight space, because Colombia play very tight. If you watch some games, they will drift wide at times. Obviously, Luis Diaz will drift out to the left. Obviously, Daniel Munoz flies forward. I love Daniel Munoz, by the way. I think he might be one of Colombia's best players. I think Daniel Munoz and John Arias aren't the most sexy players in the Colombian side, but I think they really set the tone for what Colombia want to do. If you look at Colombia, most of their starters can play 3 positions, which I think is important. Like Daniel Munoz is a centre-back, he's a right-back, he's a centre midfielder, he's a right winger, can play as a striker, you put him wherever. And he was playing amateur football at 21, 22. It's a pretty crazy story, Munoz. And now he's in the Premier League doing very well. Matias Uribe is a right-back, a defence midfielder, a number 10, a number 8. He can play everywhere. Arias is everything. is an 8, is a winger. So I think that's what's most exciting about this Colombia team, because there's so much interchanges. You know, James can be the 10, can be the deepest midfielder at times. He can be the false 9. There's a swap in position. And I think that the intelligence of certain players in that system is so key. Like Borre, on the face of it, what is Borre? Why is Borre the starter? He's not the strongest. He's not the most skillful, but he's very, very smart. He's very hardworking. And I think he fills the gap that's left by the players who are going to make the big difference. So I think it's a very collective team, but they're very narrow. Like if you see the ball in the left wing, the right winger's in the middle of the pitch. That at times there'll be nobody on the right-hand side of the field. So perhaps that's an option for Paraguay if they feel brave enough to give up a player in the middle to keep them wide. Potentially there's a switch on and they could attack, because Colombia's central defenders, I think, are good, but you know, Davinson Sanchez obviously can potentially make a mistake here and there. Very physical player, good player, but potentially can make a mistake. I'd like Lucas Cuesta, but again, no, there's a potential there to get at Colombia on the break with a quick diagonal switch potentially.
And I wanted to pick up on something you mentioned there about the intelligence and this team kind of multifunctional, because Colombia's got very close in the last Copa America in 2016. They made the in the US, they made the semis, and then the last one, 2021, they also made the semis. So they're just like maybe a touch of luck, or is it maybe like a mental kind of hurdle to try and get to that final? Because obviously the last one they won was at home, which was a different kind of tournament, the 2001. So do you think with this group of players, not just what we're talking about on the pitch now, is there something around the culture and the mentality that could see them take that extra step and make the final of the Copa America?
Yeah, I'd say I think the team has changed a lot in terms of the approach, the tactical approach, and it does feel as though players are free to be more expressive. It's in no way kind of, okay, let's keep the 2 holding midfielders there, keep James, you know, stationary as the number 10, let him drift around in that area, keep the wingers very wide. Like, I think the interchanges is a fresh approach. And to be honest, I think as well, the Colombian players play with look more relaxed, because they're not hanging out wide waiting to get the ball to try and beat the fullback. They're all together, you know. There's a lot of, you know, it's like playing at the park, you know, it's street football in a way, not to kind of overstate it, but they're very collective. They press with aggression. So I think potentially this style of play frees up some of the nerves and makes it less key the kind of the 1v1 battles or the decisive moments. It kind of feels that they defend together, they attack together. I think if it fails, it probably won't come down to individuals. And I think you look back to the last World Cup, the reason Colombia didn't go to that World Cup is because it was all on the 9 and they couldn't score, you know? It's like 6 games without scoring a goal. I think because of this new approach, it's less dependent on individuals and it's more collective. So, you know, as I say, you compare, I saw, who was it, Asprilla, comparing the Colombia 2024 squad with the 2014 squad. And I think only Luis Diaz is the guy who made it in from the 2 squads. But this team is good. Like, this team plays collectively very well. So I think there's probably less pressure on individuals to make the difference in key moments, which hopefully will produce some good results.
Now, obviously, Paraguay will look to shock, I guess, the rest of not just the group, but also the entire continent and try to get something, because I think the only way that Paraguay can indeed qualify out of the group stage would be beating one of either Brazil or Colombia. So I wanted to ask you that about what Paraguay you feel can do to expose this Colombia team and snatch a famous result. And also just moving forward as well, what are some of the concerns that you have for this Colombia side in terms of weaknesses that you feel will probably be, I wouldn't say enough, but at least that the other teams like a Brazil, you know, Uruguay, Argentina can try to expose and try to punish them on?
Yeah, as I say, I think if it comes down to just ability, this Colombia 11 probably isn't the best 11 in the tournament. Right. I think, you know, Argentina ability-wise is better. Brazil individually, even if they haven't been showing it, is probably man-for-man better. Uruguay, you'd probably say as well. So I think it will come down to that collective focus. And again, I think if it's individual battles, Colombia maybe don't come out on top. You put it 4-4-2, a Colombian 11 against a Brazil 11, probably you'd back Brazil. But so I think that collective thing will be key in success, but also could be an issue. I think yes, quick switches of play to wingers, particularly for example if Munoz gets very high forward. Often we see like someone like Mateus Uribe drift across or Lema drift across the cover, but that could be particularly on Colombia's right hand side, which I think is very very good with Munoz. But there's a potentially space to get behind him. I think the challenge will be with Colombia is maybe you could press their defenders and get some joy, but that's difficult because Colombia are so good at pressing themselves. You know, I think Colombia play with a lot of energy now, and I think it's a little bit exhausting. But I think with Paraguay, get it wide, get it into the box, set pieces, and I think just basically congest that middle of the field. You know, the challenge is going to be Luis Diaz because he'll drift off to the left, and if you keep it too congested on the left and you get Luis Diaz 1v1, like he's gone pretty much. So I think keep Luis Diaz as quiet as you can. Keep the central defense compact. I think Paraguay generally do have quite a compact defense. Get men in front of the defense and then have that one outlet out wide and just look for him on the quick counter. There is space on the field against Colombia, but you don't want to try to get them try and play in the compact spaces. Colombia want to play in that central area of the field or very tight spaces. If you can get it wide and get Colombia running into areas they don't want to run into, then there's potentially space to exploit.
Oh, I love that. I think that's a really good way to assess it. And also, I think that's probably the way that Paraguay can do it. We'll obviously give our predictions for the 3 games in a later episode, but I want to ask you, Simon, how you feel for this game, in particular, the first game in Houston, obviously an important one for both teams in terms of their futures in this tournament, also just how they assess themselves moving forward for the rest of the year. How do you assess this match, if you want to give a prediction? And also, how far do you think this Colombia team can go in this Copa America?
Yeah, I think this first game is obviously key for Colombia. They'll fancy themselves against Costa Rica. Obviously, anything can happen, but that's the second game. I think that's well placed in terms of the tournament. Whether you have a disaster in the first one or whatever happens in the first game, to think you can probably get 3 points in the second, I think is good fortune for Colombia. And then you've got the Brazil test, and hopefully Colombia will be able to try some stuff against Brazil and see how it goes without the pressure. That will be obviously the hopes for Colombia, that they get 2 good results to start with. So look, I think Colombia are favourites for this game. I think a team like Paraguay could cause Colombia trouble, just in terms of how when their back's against the wall, when it's up against it, Paraguay can play their best football. And I've seen some of the most impressive Paraguayan performances against like inform Argentina, or you know, they've played well against teams that will come out at them with confidence. I think the challenge will be for Paraguay is to try to track those men, because it's hard to know who the penalty box threat is going to be. If it's going to be Arias, it's going to be Diaz, it's going to be Munoz overlapping, it's going to be, you know, there's lots of different options. So it's going to be definitely a very challenging game for Paraguay. But I do think Colombia will win. But yeah, you know, Paraguay could definitely make things difficult.
And in terms of the whole tournament, what do you feel? Do you feel that Colombia can definitely go all the way and win their second ever Copa America title?
They definitely could. They definitely could. You know, I think the progress Colombia's made since failing to qualify for the last World Cup is great. And I think Colombia will expect to get to the next World Cup, which is great. So I think whatever happens, actually, you know, I won't say whatever happens, but I think it's very unlikely that Colombia finish this tournament feeling down about Colombian football. This isn't a massively young squad, but it's definitely an exciting squad, the way that they play. So I think the enthusiasm should continue whether they win or not. But I think they'll be looking to get out of this group and then try and play some fun football and see where it takes them.
Well, hopefully from our side that we kind of ruin that party, because obviously we want Paraguay to do well. But of course, we always hope that may the best team win, and that it will be a very entertaining game as we obviously kick off the Copa America on Monday, Paraguay against Colombia at Energy Stadium in Houston, Texas. As we close out a really great episode, Simon, I really want to thank you for doing this. But before we let you go, where can everyone find your work and follow you on social media? You know, feel free to plug away everything that you want to put in.
Yeah, no. So on Twitter at Simon Edwards SAF. So yeah, I haven't posted that much. Maybe I'll do some more during the Copa America, and if anyone needs, just give me a shout over there.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Thank you so much, Simon, for doing this. Thank you for everyone listening to this special Copa America preview episode on Guarani Vision on Colombia as we close it out here. For myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, and Ralph Hannah, thank you so much for listening in. See you soon.